Well, hey there, campers, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Camp Cryptid. I'm your host, Erica Fett, and today I'm super excited to talk about one of my absolute favorite cryptids in the entire world, and that is the Mongolian Death Worm. Now, I have talked about the Mongolian Death Worm a little bit in previous episodes, like the scariest cryptids in the world, and I was even very excited to talk about it for the Tubi documentary, The Scariest Monsters in the World, and it didn't make the list that time. I know they were discussing on which cryptids they were thinking about doing, and I know on the initial list, the Mongolian Death Worm was there, but I didn't get to talk about on that. But I thought today, instead of just talking about little segments about it, I would do like a whole episode on it. And I thought it would be a really fun episode to kind of talk about more cryptid love. Now, I do have patrons voting on the cryptid of the month for March. So I think right now the Flatwoods Monster and, maybe the Beast of Bray Road is winning. So I'll definitely keep everybody posted on which cryptid I'll be doing in March. But in the meantime, I thought we could talk about the legendary creature whose stories have been passed around for centuries now by natives to Mongolia. And it's a creature so terrifying that just by looking at it, it could kill you. So I'm very excited to talk a little bit more about the Mongolian Death Worm today. So for those of you who don't know, with the Mongolian Death Worm, it's a creepy little thing. Basically, the idea is that it's about 2 to 5 feet long. It has no legs, no arms. Some accounts say that it has no eyes, and others say that it has like big bulbous eyes. So there is a little discrepancy there. So for the most part, though, it is mostly described as being a bright red color, almost like a bloody intestine. Some people say its shape kind of resembles a sausage, so it does have a funny little look, but this little worm is very terrifying. Now, basically, there are stories that say it is toxic to touch, so just by mere touching it, you can die. Others say that by looking at it, it can kill you. There are accounts that say it can spit venom from a distance that paralyzes and kills its victims. So not only is it extremely toxic to touch, and just by looking at it, it can kill you, or, just by spitting its poison at you, it can kill you, but it is said to also have the power to electrocute its victims. So it is basically a creature of just in complete chaos and destruction. And not only is it supposed to be like this creepy little thing, it can electrocute you. Like, what? So it's got some crazy superpowers, right? Now, they say that the Mongolian Death Worm mostly dwells underground, and it tunnels underground, and it can sometimes be tracked above ground through the waves it makes through moving. So think almost like a sidewinder snake, right? It makes those movements under the sand. They say that it rarely comes to the surface, though, and it usually is mostly seen in months where there is heavy rainfall. So I think June and July are the months that they say that you can find this Mongolian death worm. But not that you want to, right? Basically, since it's so rarely seen, this is why this is a terrifying cryptid. And it's rarely seen on excavations where people have gone to try to prove its existence, but it's mostly seen to natives that are local to the area and that are traveling from place to place who see it. So, there have been excavations that have been sent out to kind of find this creature because it's said to have crazy healing properties, and who knows what other lore there is to the benefits of taking the death worm or using the death worm. It's a very terrifying little creature, and it was first documented in book form in the 1920s by the explorer Roy Chapman Andrews, and it's a book called On the Trail of Ancient Man. Now, I will post this book on Reddit for the Camp Cryptid Reddit because you can read it online for free. I believe that it's around the page 103 that he talks about this little excerpt where he talks to the minister, and they basically say, hey, well, while you're out there looking for these other things, dinosaur bones and documenting how fast gazelles can run, they also wanted him to look for this being called the Alagorhai Horhai. And now there are other ways that they refer to it as, but that was what it was referred to in the book. And mostly it's just referred to as the Mongolian death worm for everyone else. But it's a little crazy creature. And it's so funny because in the book, he talks about, Roy Chapman Andrews talks about like they were going to use like forceps to capture this thing. And he was going to wear like sunglasses to shield his eyes from like the properties that they said that this crazy creature had. So it's a very interesting little worm. And I just think it's such an interesting concept, and it's such a crazy cryptid. Like, could you imagine walking around and seeing this cryptid? But it is mostly found in the Gobi Desert, and that's in Mongolia along the Chinese border. And instead of the Gobi Desert resembling like the Sahara Desert, where it's like huge sand dunes and mostly like the sand, the Gobi Desert actually has sand, but it also is mostly like almost like a pebble and sedimentary rock that you're going to be walking on. So now there are huge basins in the Gobi Desert. They thought that at one point it had way more bodies of water. So now the Gobi Desert, even though it's a desert now, there are signs that show that it over time has gotten a lot more arid and dry, and there aren't many like huge bodies of water there like there used to be. So you'll see some sand, but like I said, it's going to be mostly rocky sediment that you'd be traveling on while in the Gobi Desert. But there's barely any water in this region other than the few salt marshes that still exist. But mostly it's just dry riverbeds that flow mostly during the summer months. Now, the scary thing is that you may find quicksand in the Gobi Desert. There's actually a spot where they found an entire skeleton of an herbivore dinosaur, a giant dinosaur that was actually preserved standing completely straight up. And they concluded that from the way that the skeleton was preserved, that this huge dinosaur actually fell into quicksand, which is actually really sad and unfortunate. But it is nice to know that we can conclude so many things from the skeleton about the region at the time. Speaking of dinosaurs, the Gobi Desert is like a huge hub for dinosaur bones and dinosaur fossils and dinosaur eggs. It is like an incredible place for people to find those things. They've done many excavations in the Gobi Desert and have found so many dinosaur and mammal skeletons from the Mesozoic and the Cenozoic eras. So you can see how long life has persisted in this Gobi Desert region. And it also tells you that life has been in the Gobi Desert for a very, very long time, and it's adapted. So I think that's a very interesting part to the Gobi Desert. What's the saying of Jurassic Park? Life finds a way. And I kind of feel like this is why I feel like the Mongolian death worm just has kind of found its way, right? So, I don't want to say that the Mongolian death worm, absolutely exists, but also I don't want to say that it doesn't. So, my big thing is when I'm looking at like research and stuff, right, then there's no way that I can absolutely read every little piece of literature out there. But there's always patterns, and patterns are what I really base a lot of this off of. So when I think about what the Mongolian death worm looks like, right, and we all know that worms are very resilient. There are worms that you cut them in half and it doesn't kill them. It just actually makes them duplicate, right? So worms have evolved in a very interesting way. So basically, there are scientists who think that the Gobi Desert was way more underwater than we think. There's obviously signs of erosion. There's sedimentary rocks. There are even traces of like shells and things that would be found on the bottom of the ocean floor that are found in this Gobi Desert region. The Gobi Desert was once way more full of life and vegetation because it had way more water and moisture in the region. And that can be concluded from the fossils and the sediment in the area that had been found over the last few centuries of explorers being there, especially with stuff like dinosaur bones and people coming to explore. Now, in Roy Chapman Andrews' book that I mentioned earlier on The Trail of Ancient Man, they refer to the ancient region of Mongolia as almost like a Garden of Eden. And they conclude that because basically of the type of mammals that they found from the age of mammals and the age of reptiles and stuff like that. So there's a ton of research that shows even the Sahara used to be like way more tropical, right? And there's research that shows like climates change. When I think of the Mongolian death worm, if anybody out there has had a saltwater tank, right? and you've had a saltwater tank and you bring in a piece of live rock. And for those of you who don't know, you can basically get these pieces of live rock that have bacteria that you can put in a saltwater tank that helps, either feed certain types of creatures that you may have in your tank, or it could be a great place to have all of your coral reef growing off of, right? It's this beautiful landscape. But sometimes when you pull in those pieces of live rock and put it in your aquarium, next thing you know, you're going to have these little things called fireworms. And fireworms are these nasty little creatures that will literally eat your clams. They'll eat your fish. They're just awful. These things basically hide. They burrow deep within the rocks and then come out basically almost are like activated by salt water. And that's when they go on the hunt. So I kind of think, like, when it comes to a Mongolian death worm, I almost think that it's kind of like the same concept, right? Like, so what if these worms have been burrowing like in the rock, in the sedimentary rock that's down below the surface, or like even have been burrowing tunnels, and once it gets rainy out, because they say that once it rains, that's when they're most seen. What if that water, that salt that's in the region, because there's tons of salt in the region still, what if that salt and everything kind of reactivates them to come out? And so that's my sci-fi approach, is that I just think of the same concept of like fireworms and live rock. I just think of it as the Mongolian death worm is just down there tunneling and stuff like that. And just when the water comes out, it's like, oh, this is my time. There's going to be more animals out there because of the water. I don't know. Maybe I'm just off on a crazy tangent right now, but that is my ideal when it comes to the Mongolian death worm. I'm just comparing it to my saltwater tank and totally just thinking that is how that creature kind of evades people, because right, the Mongolian desert is massive. We're talking almost 1,000 miles of desert. I think they said it's 500,000 square miles of desert, which is massive. So how can you have an excavation that is at every single part in that area? And they say that, the Mongolian death worm, it's only in very desolate regions, right? But who's to say what that desolate region is, especially if it's burrowing underground and has been for who knows how many years. And I just like to kind of be okay, I think it would be so cool. Well, obviously not, because this thing is terrifying. But if it did exist, that would be the way to do it, right? But yeah, so I don't know. I think it's, worms are incredibly resilient. You look at fireworms, the Australian beach worms. If you go and look on YouTube at the Australian beach worm thing, bobbit worms are terrifying, ribbon worms. There are so many worms in nature that just find a way to thrive and exist. And I mean, if I go out in my backyard right now, if I go move any of, my stones or anything, I'm going to find worms. So I just think that it's such a cool little cryptid. This Mongolian death worm is hands down one of my favorite cryptids, and I blame that on growing up with the movie Tremors because I watched that movie so many times, and that movie was so good back in the day. And that is basically, they took the idea of a Mongolian death worm and made it this giant creepy worm that's in Arizona or something. It's so cool. But, there are so many things that it could be, right? It could be misidentification, because like I said, these stories have been around for centuries now of, locals seeing this terrifying worm and having stories about people encountering this worm. And it's definitely something that people are worried about in that region. Now, what could it be? I think of the scariest thing, a lamprey, right? I'm always so afraid, if I ever take a ferry, or if I ever go diving in the Great Lakes, that I'm going to be encounter with this giant lamprey. And they're so terrifying. But that's kind of what I think about when it comes to the Mongolian death worm. Could it be a snake that maybe got misidentified? We know, even from Roy Chapman Andrews' book, there are multiple times when his expedition is pitching their tents, and at night, because it's cold as shit in the desert, right? There are pit vipers that would come and try to get warmth around the area. So we know that there are pit vipers there. We know that there's sand boas. There are tons of different species of reptiles, like lizards and snakes, that could exist in this region that have maybe been misidentified, and maybe people think that it was the Mongolian death worm. we think of eels, right? And imagine 500 years ago, you told someone there's this giant, creepy, snake-like creature that can electrocute people. People would think you were like talking about a monster, right? People would be like, there's no way that this fish could have electrical powers. But like it can. That's the crazy thing. So that's, I think, to me, like, you just think about like other species that are so incredible, and like think about some of the crazy deep sea creatures that we've found, and you see it and you're like, how is that even of Earth? You have this beautiful iridescent worm at the bottom of the ocean that's just like bobbing there lifeless, and then it just pulls down prey that's like 10 times its size. Like, what is going on with nature? It's wild. So I don't know. And the crazy thing is eels can shock you, and it's 600 volts. That is so much electrical power that an eel has. That's terrifying, right? The eel kind of got me on this like whole tangent of, so we know that the region of the Gobi Desert has large reserves of copper, gold, fluorite. Copper and rust are both conductors of energy. So maybe with the Mongolian death worm traveling underground through these tunnels that may be full of rust and copper and other conductors for energy, maybe as it's burrowing with the friction, it's creating almost like an electrical charge, right? Like, think of it as like you just running really fast across the carpet and getting a charge and charging at somebody. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it could be possible that it does have an electrical charge, especially if it's going like fast underground where it's like already a spot where there could be friction. I don't know. I think it's so fun to come up with theories about cryptids and like possible random little monsters of the world, and I'm here for it. I'm here for the Mongolian death worm. And like I said, I blame that on the movie Tremors, 100%. Now, like I said earlier, the idea that the Mongolian death worm sightings could be misidentified. It could have been like, a snake, could have been a legless lizard. The other idea, though, is that maybe it's just a tale to scare off travelers and people who came to harvest the bones of the dinosaurs of the region, as Mongolia is very ripe with dinosaur bones, and they were used for not only research purposes, but people in the area use them for medicinal purposes too. So we know that Mongolia is also very ripe with natural resources and very natural occurring minerals like copper and gold and hematite and fluorite and coal. There's tons of resources in Mongolia. So maybe the Mongolian death worm was also kind of a little monster that they made up to keep people out of the region so that they didn't have to worry about people coming in and taking their resources and taking it from their people. So, whatever the Mongolian death worm is, no matter if it's a completely made up cryptid or it's an actual little electrical like trimmer type of worm, like a graboid coming under the ground in the Gobi Desert, either way, it's a fun story and it's a fun cryptid. And I think I said in my one episode about the scariest cryptids in the world, I would love to go to Mongolia because it does look absolutely beautiful. But it also would be very terrifying to think that I'm like 10%, right? I'm 10% that, the Mongolian death worm could exist. But that 10% is pretty terrifying, especially if any of these properties about it could be true. Like, if I go there and I swear some kind of worm pops up out of the sand and like spits me with some venom, I'm going to be so mad. I'd be like, that 90% doubt, no. But either way, like I said, the Mongolian death worm is such a fun cryptid. I mean, it's so fun that if you look in lots of popular culture, they have incorporated the Mongolian death worm, right? Like I said, Tremors from, what was that, the 90s? I don't even remember when Tremors came out, but Tremors in the 90s, that is basically the Mongolian death worm. It's a lot bigger than the Mongolian death worm, but I would rather take a 2 to 5 foot worm than this giant graboid, because no way. Dune, you've got the sandworm. Even MetaZoo, the card game, had a little cute little death worm card. In World of Warcraft, I'm a World of Warcraft girl. I've played since like 2004. But there are tons of different worms. And the cool thing is like in the game, the NPC worms, you'll tell that they're there because some of them have like almost like gravel like rumbling And so, if you walk across the area, a worm's going to pop up. I think they can actually, I don't have a hunter. That's the one tune I haven't made, but there's plenty of worms, even in Shadowlands, one of the most recent expansions. They have a worm that you can actually, I think it's called a death worm, that you can basically tame to make it your pet. So I love that. There are other, like I said, though, they have had so many different types of worms that are in that game that are kind of based off the Mongolian Death Worm. So I absolutely love it. I honestly, World of Warcraft incorporates a lot of like cryptids, and because there's like Yetis and Sasquatch and Bigfoot and stuff like that. And it's my favorite. But they do have a lot of weird, like little creatures like that. So I'll have to, if I'm doing like random episodes that are on cryptids, I'll have to make sure that, there are none in like video games, But if I'm missing a video game that has the Mongolian Death Worm or a worm like the Mongolian Death Worm, please let me know. Because I would love to sit down with, like, especially with some of these cryptids, I love to sit down with people who may specialize in these to kind of like go back and forth on theories, because theories are fun, right? Like, there's no right or wrong way to go about it. And like, even one of you may develop your own theory about what the Mongolian Death Worm is. And I love that. I hope this inspires you to go out there and literally let's go find all these crazy creatures, right? But I mean, like I said, a Mongolian Death Worm is a cool little cryptid, and it's been featured in so many things in pop culture, and it's just a fun little thing to talk about. So I thought that it would be a little fun episode today to just kind of talk about this little creepy guy and have some fun with it. But yeah. So that is my little Mongolian Death Worm episode, and I'm really excited because I love talking about cryptids and I love talking about creatures. It's so fun. But I also love talking about all of your stories that are from you listeners. So if y'all have a creepy experience or a cryptid you'd like to talk about, or if there's like some kind of experience that you had that you're like, I saw the Loch Ness Monster, please send it in to me so I can read it for a Campfire Tales episode. And I love reading your stories. It's my favorite. I'll be doing another Campfire Tales in March, so I have a lot of stories to go through, but also I am always accepting new stories. So like I said, you can go to campcryptidpod.com. There's a little contact section where you can leave me your story. Or hey, like I said, if you have a reference that you've seen the Mongolian Death Worm in, please let me know. Either you can leave in the comments on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, or you can just send me a message on the website. Either way, I'm super happy. But yeah, in the meantime, I hope y'all have been having a great week. I finished the season finale of True Detective. I loved it. I cried at the end. I was like, this is so good. It's so, oh God, it was like, oh, my heart. And I also, completely unrelated, I signed up for Netflix again. I hate myself for it, but I started watching Love is Blind again. So, tell me why I did that. So yeah, that's what I have going on this week. Nothing too exciting. I'm trying to get all the fun stuff scheduled for March and get some cosplays in store. And I have been posting some supplemental like pictures and theme stuff that I do on my Camp Cryptid Patreon. You guys can all follow for free. There's no expectation to sign up on one of the tiers. But hey, follow for free because I post the episodes, I post behind the scenes, and I post my little theme cosplay shoots on there too. So it's a lot of fun. So we have like a fun little community on there. And I just want to thank you all so much for hanging out with me and talking about the coolest little cryptid, the Mongolian Death Worm. It's one of my favorites. And I honestly, like, I could talk about this little guy for like an entire season. It's so fun. But yeah, thanks so much y'all for hanging out. I really appreciate it. Until next time, take care.